evening, and welcome to the first episode of the Women in Engineering Inspire series. And I'm Taiba Khanam, a final year electrical engineering student and proudly also a fellow of led by Fellowship 2021. And today I have Dr. Ruha Shadab with me, who is the founder of Led by Foundation. And Ruha is a doctor turned public health professional turned social entrepreneur. As I said, she's a founder of Led by Foundation, a unique leadership incubator that works on improving equity in the workplace. So, she's a recent graduate from Harvard University, where she received her master's in public policy on a full tuition scholarship. On graduation, she was also awarded the Harvard Kennedy School Women's Leadership Award, the first Indian to receive it. During her master's, she served as the co-chair of the India Conference at Harvard, worked at Yale University as first author for a medical ethics paper, and at the Gates Foundation on a global health strategy. So, like I said, Ruha, I have been proudly a fellow, but I guess we have a lot of other guests over here, and we would love for you to explain a little bit about your aim on starting Led by Foundation and what exactly does Led by Foundation aim to do with Indian Muslim women.
Thank you for the introduction and thank you for inviting me to this platform. Before I talk about Led by, I also want to just share a little bit about my AMU or Aligarh Connect, which probably isn't shown in my LinkedIn profile that well. So I'm originally from Aligarh. That's where my parents are from. We used to live in AMU for the longest time. My father studied there. All my chachus are engineers from AMU, including a mamu. So very, very deep connection to the AMU, and it's always a delight to speak to students who are from there. So again, thank you for that. That being said, I can speak to what Led by does. So it's a bit of a long story. I'll keep it to the more juicier parts. So I spent my high school and college in Delhi, and that's where I got my MBBS degree from. And this entire time when I was studying my medicine degree, I noticed that working in a Delhi government hospital, which is providing free tertiary healthcare, my patient population had a massive representation of Muslims in it, which was very different from what school or college experience was. If you're raised in an upper income or in a middle income setup or milieu in Delhi, the chances are that your Muslim friends are going to be very, very limited. And your exposure to role models from the Muslim community would be very limited. And I was very, very acutely aware of all of that. But it was very interesting to see how finally, in some sense, I could meet a lot more Muslims. But that also made me wonder that why is this overrepresentation of Muslims happening in my patient population? So that's how I got pulled towards trying to think about health access about Muslims and especially Muslim women, given my hospital had a massive obstetrics and gynecology department. So I was thinking when I applied to the Harvard Kennedy School for my master's, because I knew I wanted to work in public health and public policy, ताकि I can create change which can really spread across the country. I wrote my application to Kennedy School and it was entirely centered on Muslim women and being able to improve health access. But when I spent my first year trying to figure out कि root causes है क्या, end state क्या होना चाहिए of my endeavor, I realized कि अगर आप healthcare access पे दे दो, does that really convert into independence, agency, ability to make decisions by themselves? And the truth is that's not the case. I'll tell you one simple story. So we would counsel people for family planning if they had very large families. So if you probably came in with your fourth or fifth child, it was protocol to talk to you about family planning. And there was a very, very clear distinction between the Muslim community women and non-Muslim women community. Mind you, कि India overall ही conservative है and women do not often have agency. मगर इसमें भी काफी stark difference दिख रहा था that the women from our community were just exhibited कि उनके पास अपने body, अपने health पे भी कोई decision making ability नहीं थी या कोई independence नहीं था. So that made me wonder how do you bring that to them? So, by studying what all makes the foundation of being able to get independence, one of the levers that we thought were going to be the most impactful was the economic lever, which is basically help women get financial independence. And that translated into the idea of led by most coherently. So, our goal at led by is very simple but very ambitious at the same time. Muslim women make up 8% of India's population. We want them to make up 8% of India's workforce. And that's what we provide through the foundation. We provide fully funded professional development programs with the goal to make this number a percentage which is currently less than 1% to 8%. And to sum it up, yeah, we hope to work ourselves out of a job within our generation. Tayeba, back to you.
Wonderful, right? So, having been a led by fellow, I can proudly say that yes, led by has been a great support. And I would encourage all the young girls over here when they graduate, please do apply to accelerator programs and the fellowship as when you're eligible. Moving on, Ruha, you talked about providing Muslim women with access, avenue, and agency at the college level or at the workspace level, which is evidently very helpful in exposing us to great opportunities at the higher education level or in the workspace. And since Led By is a leadership program and designed for like 100 million individuals, in your opinion, why is leadership important as a skill, especially in women? And more specifically, how does one inculcate it?
There's a very broad definition of leadership that I like to follow. But it again sums up in very simple words, which is leading by example. Now, being a leader does not mean controlling, commanding, having 10,000 people say yes, ma'am, yes, sir to you. I think being a leader is being someone who very strongly follows their values and principles and are the kind of individual who are unafraid to speak to them and to live by them. And the reason I think it's really important, and especially why I think it's really, really, really important in the community that I want to work for, which is the Muslim community, especially Muslim women community, is I strongly believe to be able to be heard, you need to speak up. And we need to make our voice louder. Being able to make your voice louder requires you to have leadership skills, requires you to have confidence, requires you to have the ability to articulate your ideas. But that all is developing within one person. There's another aspect to that by which I think can be understood even by folks from AMU, because in AMU you have the luxury of actually having a lot of Muslims around you, so you don't feel that sort of alienation that a lot of people outside of these hubs sometimes tend to feel in terms of being the singular Muslim person in your class, in your college, in your office. So the second aspect, which I think you might be able to resonate with, is also Abhi, who is in power or who are in leadership roles in India? There are hardly any Muslims in leadership roles. And what we need to be able to get more power is to have access to those who are currently in power so that this asymmetry is mitigated. And that's another thing we try to do with ZPI is be able to build bridges to people who are in power right now. So we have a lot of Muslim role models and Muslim executives as a part of our advisors and presidents who host office hours with our fellows. But we also have a lot of non-Muslims who take out their time to train ZPI fellows, who take out their time to build the right connections, help with recruitment, help with references. So this sharing of power with people who currently have some, I think is another component that's really crucial and is applicable and useful to people who also come from cities like Aligarh, where they already have this sense of community with other Muslims.
Right. So I'll be handing over to Munazza, who's also the moderator for this session. Munazza, over to you.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Women in Engineering Inspire series. I'm Munazza Sajid. I'm a final year undergraduate student of BA Psychology at AMU, and I will be co-hosting this event on behalf of IEEE AMU. We are very excited to host Dr. Ruha Shadab today. So, ma'am, your journey from being a doctor to a public health professional and then a social entrepreneur is very impressive. And while practicing medicine is a noble profession in itself, and it may also make a great social impact. But what motivated you to transition your career path from a doctor to a public policy maker? Could you please elaborate on that?
So thank you for the question, and also please don't call me ma'am. Just call me Ruha, or if you want to make me feel old, you can call me Ruha Api, but no
All
ma'am.
right.
Um, yeah. So this transition, I'm glad you used the word transition, and there's another word that people use, which is pivot. And I don't
Yes.
think of it as a pivot, and I'll tell you why. हाँ ठीक है, like I moved from being a doctor to public health. थोड़े लोग कहेंगे public policy एक और pivot हो गया. Then there's social entrepreneurship. But to me, it all seems like a very natural flow because my goal was always, I was always driven by social impact. Like that was my calling. So I became a doctor because I thought, like you said, it was a noble profession and you get to help people and you get to provide
Yes.
care to people. I became a doctor. I saw कि यार इंडिया में बहुत बुरी हालत है public sector की when it comes to hospitals and healthcare. And I was not going to work in the private sector. Like I was just not interested in being a private sector doctor. So I was like, okay, if I work in the government hospital, they've been like nightmare stories. So for example, like I was an intern, right? Like lowest rung of the hierarchy after graduating medicine. And there was once a time where we didn't have tourniquets, which are basically just bands you tie on people's arms ताकि आप blood draw कर सको. ठीक है? So you use shoelaces to tie people's arms together to pull blood out. Right? Resources का deficit बहुत ज़्यादा है. So I was like, even if you become a doctor, even if you're the best doctor, if you are working in a resource constrained environment, you will be limited. So how do you solve for that? So that's how I moved into public health. कि ठीक है, like let's try to solve for larger system change.
Okay.
And while that was happening, it then further moved me to also continue to have an appreciation for being able to support the Muslim community to have more resources and access,
Okay.
which I just think it's the fight of our generation. Ki if we do not have an inclusive India where every single Indian gets the opportunity that they deserve,
Yeah.
it will be a huge feeling on our behalf.
Okay. Moving back to Led by Foundation, and you mentioned that you work for Indian Muslim women, young Indian Muslim women. And even though the education sector is the most preferred sector by women in India, and only 5% of the women are working as leaders in the Indian higher education industry. And even among this percentage, representation of Indian Muslim women is practically invisible. So, despite Muslims being the largest minority in India, I believe that the Led by Foundation has taken a very important responsibility to work for the upliftment of Indian Muslim women, and it was very long overdue. But were there any specific eye opening incidents which made you realize that, oh, you need to intervene and help out?
So you mean to say was starting that by driven by any eye-opening instances?
Yeah.
For example? I don't think there was one instance, honestly, Manatha. I think like being a minority is just a string of things that happened throughout my life that made me want to do something. And another thing that you notice about Led By is hamare web page pe, if you go onto our website, like the first thing we say is that we work for Indian Muslim women. And that itself is a form of rebellion in this country. Because being able to say ki, haan, you know, we are targeting Muslim women, we're providing them professional support, nobody else can apply to our fellowship, is a way of asserting our identity and asserting our needs. And I'll give a very simple example. I'm not answering your question just yet, but a simple example of, I'm sure there are non-Muslims on this call, and I hope they are. And you might ask, ki, Ruha, why do you have this fellowship just for Muslim women? इंडिया का तो फीमेल लेबर फोर्स पार्टिसिपेशन ओवरऑल ही घटा है पिछले 10 साल में, सिर्फ मुस्लिम वुमेन के लिए नहीं घटा है. Absolutely 100% right. 2 points over there. ठीक है. First of all, Led By itself has provided support to a number of other organizations जहाँ पे हमने अपना पूरा curriculum उनको hand over किया है. If you want to target another community and support them, here, take all our material, remove our name, apply your name, and work on this. And we will continue to provide you other capacity building support. Because we all need to move together to be able to move the needle on women's labor force participation rate. However, Ledby will continue to be the place for Indian Muslim women because think of it this way: as a doctor, if I get two different people with fever, am I going to give them the same antibiotic? Am I going to give them the exact same diagnostic or sorry, exact same treatment? नहीं, हाँ, paracetamol शायद दोनों को दे दूंगी. But I get some blood test done. हो सकता है एक को malaria हो, एक को typhoid हो सकता है एक को viral हो, which would require completely different treatment. And yes, while women have low labor force participation rates right now, you cannot deny कि जो लोग different communities से आ रहे हैं, हो सकता है क्या? Like there is research to show कि the reasons for that participation are different. There is systemic discrimination against Muslims. There is no denying that. To be able to solve that, to be able to build a community for them is really important. So to answer your question, finally, koi ek instance nahi tha. I think it's just the culmination of my experience of being a Muslim in India that has made me want to develop this. And it's something I've been working on for the past 3-4 years now.
So, how has your journey of creating Ledby been so far? You started it from scratch not very long ago, and it is thriving today, mashallah. What was it in its infancy, and where do you see it in, say, 10 years down the line?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, friends, I started this off जब मैं अपने masters के second year में थी. Like first year खत्म करके I was moving on to my second year. And there was this social incubator that Harvard had. I had applied, I was writing to them to create some sort of platform for Muslim women. And what my idea was essentially on visibility and voice of Muslim women. I'm like, I just want to see more of them everywhere. Okay, I want more of them in the newspaper, I want more of them on TV, I want more of them in scientific journals. Now, the struggle, I think, over the first 6 to 8 months was accepting that I can't do all of that. Right? You have to be more laser focused, which is the same reason why we're working for Muslim women. We need to also get more focused. Ki uske bhi andar needs to be targeted segments that you're working on because everything requires a customized solution to be able to have meaningful change. So I think that initial process of really identifying ki root causes kya hain, कौन से एरिया पे हमें फोकस करना है was very challenging. Of course, managing that with academics. I was also working on another research project at Yale and hustling for another 2-3 things like the India conference at Harvard was very, very time consuming. But I think it helped that I was phenomenally driven by this cause.
Okay. And ma'am, where do you see it a few years later?
Yeah, sorry, I missed that part. And please don't call me ma'am.
Oh,
I
sorry.
think we have a very clear vision that in 10 years' time, we want to be the one-stop shop for all career-related needs for Indian Muslim women. So if you want to be able to figure out which college to go to, what kind of job to get to, how to apply to jobs, which jobs to apply to, where do you get interview support from, where do you get references from, all of this entire spectrum will be supported. Then there's another aspect of it which we want to support is even being able to help Muslim women negotiate, which I think is one of the most important skills that women need to learn overall and something we use every day. Like negotiating with your manager for a hike is one thing. You also negotiate with your parents when you ask them to go out for a movie, right? So to be able to negotiate to continue to let you work, to be able to negotiate with your partner about continuing to work or choosing a city for working in are all very important skills that we also want to help women develop. So a one-stop shop need to be able to address all your career aspirations is what we see ourselves in a 10-year time.
Okay, that's great. Let's talk a bit about your experience at Harvard. We all know it's a very prestigious institution. So what are your thoughts about its culture and To be more specific, what's the general attitude of students and faculty towards minorities specifically?
I really enjoyed my Harvard experience because it exposed me to a lot of other nationalities and social movement causes that I was able to understand that there's a lot of solidarity to be developed. It was Harvard that led me to Palestine, and I stayed there for a few weeks and was able to understand the Palestinian movement. I was able to go to parts of the world where, for a change, you actually see no Indians. So I spent a few months in Chile, जहाँ पे like पूरे country का Indian community size was 4,000 people. That's very, very rare. And I still conducted a CAA protest over there. So that was pretty cool to have South America on the map for the CAA protest. So all these exposures happened because of Harvard, which I really enjoyed. In terms of वहाँ के students and faculty ka view towards minorities, a lot of my friends were open to learning, but also had no understanding of, say, the Muslim context in India, which is bizarre, right? You give it 200 million people. That's just a number people can't even wrap their heads around. And to understand how Muslims or the lived reality of Muslims are in India and the fact that it's really not a part of common knowledge at all was unsurprising. But I also feel कि अगर आपके पास opportunity है to educate people about things that matter to you, I like taking that opportunity. So I didn't feel burdened by sharing it. And in fact, just felt good that I was given the opportunity to educate more people about this cause who now probably have it at the back of their minds.
Okay. All right. So, since we are running out of time, and I'm sure our audience would also have some questions that they would like to ask you, I would just conclude with two more questions. And first of which is that you've had first-hand experience of getting accepted at Harvard. And in your experience, what specific qualities and mindset do you think that highly competitive and intellectually stimulating environments like Harvard require and appreciate?
There's something very unique about applying to universities abroad, and I speak to American universities. ठीक है, वहाँ पे everything that you need to know to apply is written on their website. It's practically a cheat code. ठीक है, so what I did was I looked at their application process and was able to see कि उनके website में literally लिखा हुआ होता है what are we looking for, and then they have 5 to 7 characteristics. So what I did was I was very meticulous and extremely organized in how I approached this. I said, "Chalo, ye to bahut hi convenient." I've written like maybe 5 things with the description. So description ka bhi sub point bana ke maybe there were 15 things that any Harvard Kennedy School was looking for. So what I landed up with was like default setting. My default setting in life is okay. Let's make an Excel sheet about this. So I wrote down everything that Harvard wants in my first column, and then in my first row I wrote down उनको क्या क्या evidence दे रही हूँ मैं, CV दे रही हूँ, essays दे रही हूँ, letter of recommendation दे रही हूँ, अपना GMAT score दे रही हूँ, and then I said which of these is ticking off which of these characteristics. So for example, if you want leadership, my CV is showing I had leadership positions. If you're looking at analytical aptitude, my GMAT score is high enough to show you that I have analytical aptitude. And a letter of recommendation में my ex-boss is saying Ruha did a very good job with creating some model. So ऐसे करके I mapped it and made sure that I was more or less in the majority of my submissions showing that I have these characteristics. So I think my push to people who are interested in doing this, and this doesn't just apply to Harvard, right? It also applies to when you're applying for a job. People write JDs for a reason, and बहुत मेहनत से लोग लिखते हैं JDs. I mean, when I write a led by JD, every word has meaning to it, right? So you read that JD very carefully and go through the effort of editing your resume accordingly. Somebody is spending 6 seconds to reject or accept your resume. So they're obviously not reading everything. But if the GD has some responsibilities written in it, make sure those words pop in your resume. And then you send that through to the recruiter. So I think just being very calculated in making, not calculated, I think you just want to make it easier for the person reviewing you. उनको ये 5 चीजें चाहिए, दिखा दो that you have these 5 things. And at the end of the day, Another thing that's slightly different about this selection process compared to Indian competitive exams, and I've taken quite a few Indian competitive exams myself, is that in these universities, when you're applying like this, and I think even in jobs generally, which would apply to India as well, it's not about whether you're good enough or not. It's about whether you are a good fit.
Okay.
And that's all. It's not personal if you get rejected. It's just like they are looking for something about उस fit में आ रहे हो कि नहीं is what the question is. It's not about, oh, you need to be rank 1 to get through. Or you need to be the smartest in the class to get through. You just need to fit what they're looking for.
All right. So we can safely conclude that organization and perseverance are two of the main components.
Very well summed up. Yeah.
All right. So we'll move on to questions from the audience. If you have any questions, you can write them down in the chat box.
I see one question, but I can also, people can unmute themselves if we have more time later. So I can read Zara's question.
Yeah.
Share your thoughts and advice about establishing a healthy work-life balance. I'm not the right person for that. I'm not. I'm sorry. I don't support the hustle culture, but I recognize that it's very important to me. And that's where I derive the most joy from. Indra Nui ne kaha tha yaar ek baari, theek hai, and I read this many years ago. And that's when I used to be like, work-life balance, women in the workforce, like, manage ho sakta hai. And Indra Nui had said there is no such thing as work-life balance. I think it was Margaret Albright who was the first US Secretary of State, which basically means in America ki pehli female foreign minister, who died last week or something like that at the age of 92. She's like a career diplomat. She also said that koi work-life balance nahi hai. She in fact left her daughter's wedding reception to go for a big conference. Like she flew straight out of the reception to go for a conference. What I mean to say by all of this is it's not a yes or no. It's about priorities, right? So I work with people in this exact same job, in the exact same space, who do manage to set work-life boundaries because unko wo matter karta hai zyada. They have to take out time for their husband or for their partner or for their children, and they make those lines. I recognize that for me, the most important thing is led by, full stop. Like that is what I want to devote every waking hour. And it works for me. It just completely works for me. I do take out like every other week, I take out like one day which was actually yesterday, which was like iftar ke baad I just had like a giant pizza by myself and fell asleep. And I rested by myself. So it's to say that if you want work-life balance, then be, again, very calculated in what role you're going for. Solve for jobs that provide those or have a work culture which is more 9 to 5 or 9 to 6. Have those open conversations with your manager because your needs need to be expressed. And if something is important to you, need to put it on the table. Varna, how will the person know? I think one example that comes from my life, and I'll stop after this, is exercising is really important to me. So I'll be like, buddy, I have to take out 1 hour every other day to go to the gym. Meetings will get cancelled, things will move because I need to get that hour for myself. So you need to draw your boundaries and you need to communicate that to your team, your leadership.
All right. I was looking at all the work you do and I was very fascinated by how everything you do, you were managing simultaneously while you were at Harvard and you were also employed at Yale. So I had a similar question as Zehra's, so it has been answered now. So if somebody has another question, they can write it down in the chat box.
I'm also putting in my email ID, so in case you get a question later on, please feel free to write to me. I'm very responsive on email, as Manatsa and Tayeba will concur.
All right, so I think it's time to...
We see Shavirya. There are people who have a lot of potential and may have some great ideas for creating positive change in workspaces and society in general. However, they may not necessarily have the means to take their ideas further and put them into action. What is your advice for such listeners? I think that's a very good question. And that's why when I define leadership, right, I said leadership is about living your principles and values with determination. It's not about commanding people. And I think this is also that कि अगर आपको social change create करना है and you don't have the means, first of all, be the person who you want to be in terms of, I'm only giving it an example of that, right? So if you care about Muslim women's participation and you can't go create an organization or give people scholarships, then have those difficult conversations with your parents or your extended family who you think are not supportive of women working. Right? That's an example of leadership. That's an example of positive social impact. So that's one thing. The second thing is about solving for yourself, which I think is really important. India is overall, I mean, India, I think if you look at numbers, you can almost say that 60% of us are low income, or maybe even 70% is low income, which effectively means the majority of India is in is poor or is in poverty. Right. So what you need to solve for first is create your own social security net. And I think that's really important. So if you don't have the means to create an organization and you don't have the means to even, or you need the means to support yourself and support your family, 100% that should come first. Yeah. Like you solve for that, make yourself economically, financially independent, support the family that you need to support, solve for your immediate responsibilities, and then God willing, you'll be able to perhaps move into a full-time social impact space, or you'll be able to do thoda, you'll be able to take out time or donate to relevant organizations. But I completely agree with you that if this is the case, you need to first focus on creating your own financial independence, which is extremely important. And I think it's not right or wrong. I mean, just that's obviously like the first thing that you need to solve for. And I acknowledge that what I have been able to do is because of privilege that I've had, right? I didn't have to pay rent when I was doing my first few jobs. That saved me so much money because I was living with my parents. Like that's a huge boon. I can't even imagine having to move to Delhi and work on the salary that I was working on. I wouldn't have been able. I wouldn't have been able to take these jobs. I've taken pay cut after pay cut to do the kind of work I want to do. So I recognize that comes from privilege, that comes from having a certain amount of social security behind. But I'll just end with saying that then the reason I think that I do this is if you have the privilege of knowing, you do not have the luxury of not doing. So that basically means that you have the privilege of knowing what our challenges are and yourself have privilege in the traditional sense of privilege. Then in that setting, you do not have the luxury of inaction.
All right, that's very reflective. So, would you like to take the last question?
I think Taha's question, and then I really have to jump on my next call. So Taha, your question is, yeah, please don't call me ma'am. Thanks for putting in brackets, and I would have removed it altogether. Reaction from your social circle, and how did it affect you and led by? So like I was saying, I've taken pay cut after pay cut, so usi mein my social circle was very, very disturbed and concerned. So even going from MBBS and not doing an MD, and instead of working in an NGO or having a jhola chap type of job was very disconcerting to all my doctor uncles, very, very much so. They thought, oh, iska to MD mein shayad hua hi nahi, yeah, she's maybe not that intelligent. And I could feel all of these reactions and I couldn't care less. Because that's the fun part about being driven, is that you don't give beep beep about what anybody thinks.
Right.
So that was very helpful. And then those people came around, right? When I got into Harvard, on a full tuition scholarship, they were like, we knew you would do this. हाँ हमें तो पता था रूहा ये करेगी, बहुत intelligent लड़की है. And then if you talk about led by, I'll give you an even closer example. Like somebody from like one of my closest family members would annoy me so much क्योंकि वो led by को मेरी hobby कहते थे. ठीक है. And when you're putting in 16, 18 hours of work a day and somebody calls your work a hobby, it's a little painful.
Right.
So I was told that led by is a hobby for almost a year. And then after we had our first fellowship, the same person called me up and said, I didn't understand what you were doing, but now I understand and I'm so proud of you. So the truth shall prevail, as Gandhiji used to say. So you do your work and people will come around. but you also really don't need to care about people's opinions. You need to be driven and need to continue to be determined to do your work. And then all of this needs to be kept outside your line of sight and shouldn't perturb you. Easier said than done. I had a lot of friends who helped me through this. I had amazing brothers who've helped me through this and have been my support. But that's my not so brief answer. Thanks for the question, Papa.
All right.
Yup. So, packing it up, Ruha, congratulations and led by the entire tribe and the community that led by aims at serving. We all here did resonate with a lot of what you've mentioned, the birth, the journey, the goal, and thus on behalf of the entire IEEE AIME student branch and the Women in Engineering Affinity Group, I sincerely thank you for taking the time out on a supposedly packed Saturday morning. Thank you so much.
It was very great talking to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me over email, folks, about anything you want to talk about that I could be helpful, or even if you just want a sounding board.
Sure.
All right, then. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank